Hey, hope your day or night's going well. Let's talk about Alien Isolation. This game rules and you should buy it. Okay, but no, seriously. Over the last few years, I've become a pretty big horror game fan, and I've always really liked the Alien movies. Well, the good ones, that is. So when I found out there was a survival horror game set in the Alien universe, you could imagine how excited I was to check it out. I went into this game basically blind, as I prefer knowing as little as possible when it comes to horror games. I've now finished it and its DLC multiple times, so I'll be sharing that experience with you today. Also, before we start, this game is very dark, which YouTube compression tends to hate, and it's also super reliant on sound, so I recommend watching this video in a darker environment with either a good pair of headphones or a sound system. Alright, with that out of the way, let's talk about what this game is. Alien Isolation is a survival horror game with simulator elements set in the Alien universe. It takes place 15 years after the events of the first movie, and many years before the second one. This game is so deeply connected to the first movie that I would very much not recommend playing this game before watching at least that movie for reasons I'll get into more later. The development behind this game is pretty interesting. It was published by Sega and developed by Creative Assembly, which are most well known for the Total War series of games, as well as the more recent Halo Wars 2. I'm not really sure how you get from making top-down strategy games to a first-person horror game, but hey, if it works, right? Let's talk about the story now. Alien Isolation kicks off with a quote from the very end of the first Alien movie, where Ellen Ripley describes her current status and what she has just been through.
Final report of the commercial starship Nostromo. Third officer reporting. The other members of the crew: Kane, Lambert, Parker, Brett, Ash, and Captain Dallas, are dead.
This is a very good start, because it sets the scene for newcomers that haven't seen the first movie, and it's also a nice callback for those that have. It sets the tone for what the Alien universe is about, and for what you're about to experience. We then meet our main protagonist that we will be playing as, Amanda Ripley, Ellen Ripley's daughter. If you've seen Aliens, you would know that Ellen had a daughter, but sadly spent very little time with her as she died of old age while Ellen was in hypersleep. Amanda is a mechanical engineer currently employed by the Weyland-Yutani Corporation, the same company that her mother was employed by. Amanda is obviously very concerned about her mother's disappearance, given by this point, no one knows what happened to her or her crew on their last mission. We then find out that a space vessel has picked up what they believe to be the flight recorder from the ship that her mother was on. Amanda is then offered the choice to come along on the mission to retrieve the flight recorder and accepts the offer without hesitation. After this is where we get our first section of gameplay, as the crew has almost arrived at their destination. This is when you get to familiarize yourself with the controls, meet your crew, and explore the world a little bit. We then fast forward to Amanda and her team arriving at the station known as Sevastopol, where the vast majority of the game takes place. Right away, the crew notices that the ship is damaged and attempts to make contact with anyone on board. With initial contact failing and docking not being possible, they decide to leave their ship and travel to the station on their own. Disaster strikes though, and the crew is separated from each other, leaving everyone to fend for themselves until they can get back together. It's not long after this that we truly realize the current state of the Sevastopol, but Amanda and her crew are still not fully aware of what awaits them on board. The introduction to this game is handled extremely well. It establishes the world and its characters without overwhelming you with information, and wastes no time in getting you up to speed with the current situation. Unfortunately though, the story is kind of all over the place after this. A lot of the characters that you would think are important are basically forgotten about until the very end of the game. There's actually a lot of cutscenes in this game, at least way more than I was expecting. The most interesting thing about the story for me was the parts where we really got to see how easily humans can fall apart when they're in a life or death situation. The decisions they make and how they affect others were always handled really well, and every moment like this was when I was the most invested. This game tries to establish a main villain around the halfway point, but I don't think this worked. It felt really shoehorned in and just kind of unnecessary. I'm not saying they shouldn't have had a human antagonist though either, I just think the way they chose to handle it was kinda sloppy because it comes out of nowhere. Aside from the main plot though, there's a lot of side information for you to discover through the text files and audio logs. A lot of these are just random nothing logs, but a lot of them are also decently interesting to read through because it gives you a greater understanding of what's going on. The story absolutely does have its moments, but as a whole, I don't think it's what most people are going to remember this game for. Let's talk gameplay now. Alien Isolation's gameplay is going to be really hit or miss depending on who you are, and it's probably the main thing that's going to decide whether this game is for you or not. Structurally, it features 19 missions, with each one revolving around some kind of main objective. This is where those simulator elements I mentioned earlier come in. These objectives almost always include something like turning on the power, fixing a generator, going to collect an item for someone, stuff like that. Every objective location is placed on your map that you can access anytime, so you aren't just wandering around aimlessly. Of course, though, you have to do all this while also trying to avoid the alien or some other threat. There's really three core things that you go back and forth between in this game: stealth, combat, and puzzles. Stealth is obviously where you're trying to avoid enemies without engaging them. This is usually accomplished by just waiting for an enemy to move away and then quickly sneaking past them, but you can also create items that let you distract enemies too. You usually have more than one way to get around enemies, like just going through a different room or taking an air vent. If stealth has proven to be too much of a challenge though, you are able to fight some enemies provided you have the necessary tools to do so. Early on, you only have access to basic weapons like a maintenance jack and a revolver. These are really only good for last-ditch efforts when you're in trouble because of how weak and unreliable they are. Later on though, you will get much more effective weapons like a shotgun.
I'd like to keep this handy for close encounters.
And of course the iconic flamethrower. They really try to hammer home that Ripley is an engineer and not a soldier whenever you decide to engage in combat because of how shaky her aim is, which I think is a nice touch. This isn't Dead Space where you're just mowing down hordes of enemies at a time. You have to be really careful when deciding when to fight an enemy and when to stay hidden. There's 3 different enemy types that you will be encountering. Survivors, which are just normal people like you trying to make it out alive. Androids, which are robots created by the Weyland-Yutani Corporation to kill anyone that tries to interfere with the company's goals. And the alien. The first 2 are the enemies that you will want to be in combat with because you can actually kill them. The alien, on the other hand, is not an enemy that you can kill. At best, you can scare it off temporarily to buy yourself enough time to get somewhere safe. So basically, kill the survivors and androids when you have to, but avoid the alien at all costs. Finally, there's the puzzles. These are small mini-games that you have to do regularly in order to complete certain tasks like hacking into a computer for a code or turning some piece of equipment on. These are really easy on their own, but you will often have to do these when there's enemies around, so it can get really tense at times. You're also able to create items from parts you find that can help you through certain situations, like noisemakers and health stims. For some reason, you can't make items while hiding in a locker though, which is annoying. That's the gameplay of Alien Isolation. I think it's pretty great because of its immersive simulator-like mission structure and its intense survival combat, but if you're not someone that enjoys slow-paced games, then Alien Isolation might not be for you. Let's talk about performance and atmosphere next. Starting with performance first. There's not too much to say here other than this game runs incredibly well. Like almost too good to believe well given how good it looks. Although if you're on PC, you're going to want to make a couple adjustments for the best experience. First, you should cap your frame rate to 105. This is because this game has problems at frame rates higher than that, like animations being too fast or audio being absent in certain sections, which is obviously not what you want. You can either do this through your monitor settings or just do it in the NVIDIA control panel if you have an NVIDIA card, so that's what I did. If all you care about is a smooth experience, then you can stop there and get started, but there's 2 more things I recommend you do. This game has really bad anti-aliasing out of the box. This is where the edges of certain objects can look like they're moving or shimmering at a certain distance. Luckily though, someone made a mod that fixes that called Alias Isolation. Great name. You can download it from Nexus, run the setup, and you're good to go. The last thing I installed was an enhanced graphics mod. This just improves a couple things like shadow resolution and makes reflections a lot clearer. You install it the same way as the Alias mod, so it's super easy and I recommend doing it if you have even a somewhat decent PC. Once I actually got started, I put all the settings on max and it kinda just worked. I didn't have any frame rate issues or anything, so that was great. It's a well-optimized game, what else can I say? It's even on mobile. Let's talk about how it actually looks now. So this game is obviously very inspired by its source material, but how did they do in adapting that material to a game? I think they did an excellent job. Now the first Alien movie was cutting edge for its time, but it definitely relies on your imagination a lot to create the world that it takes place in. Here though, you get to see and explore every bit of that world in some seriously impressive detail. I got lost so many times just looking around the rooms at all the little details that designers put in place. There's so many nods and references hidden everywhere. You can really tell this was made by passionate people that cared a lot about the source material. Getting to walk around the Torrens at the start was pretty surreal given how many things there are from the movie there. This game also just looks great when you don't take into account the fan service and just look at it as a game. I can't believe this is from 2014 and still looks this good. It's a horror game, so it's obviously really dark most of the time, but I still found myself stopping every now and then to just admire the scenery, even if there was a murderous alien around the corner. The visuals in this game are such a huge part of why it's so immersive. The developers do an amazing job in making you feel like you're alone in space and trapped on a ship with a monster on board. You occasionally get to look outside through some windows, and this is when you'll really get that sense of how bad your current situation is. There's also this subtle film grain effect, which I think is a nice touch. It kind of makes you feel like you're watching found footage almost. There's some truly incredible late game areas too that I won't spoil. So yeah, I think Alien Isolation is a pretty fantastic looking game. Let's talk about audio next. Now, bad audio can literally make or break a game like this. Fortunately, the audio in this game is equally, if not more impressive than the visuals that accompany it. Audio is a really important thing for horror games because it's one of the two things that developers use to try to scare you or mess with you. They're either going to show you the thing that you should be scared of, or they're going to make you listen to it, and Alien Isolation uses both of these techniques incredibly well. The developers here use sound in such a way that ensures that you will always be feeling exactly how they want you to feel. If they want you to be calm, then you will be calm. If they want you to be uneasy, then you're going to be uneasy. If they want you to feel relieved, then you're going to feel relieved. And if they want you to be scared, then you're going to be scared. The way they use environmental sounds is especially immersive in this game because of how over-the-top some of it is, like the sound of huge machinery at work, or the sound the tram makes when you're waiting for it. I cannot stress enough how much you owe it to yourself to use either a good pair of headphones or a sound system for this game because of just how particularly crafted the soundscape of this world is. The sounds aren't just for special effects either. More times than not, the sound is actually a gameplay feature in this game. Of course, your primary methods for avoiding danger is going to be your eyes and your tools, but sound is another thing that you can use to your advantage to get through a situation. Unfortunately, the audio isn't completely perfect, and that's because it doesn't always work as intended, and it's really noticeable when this happens. The easiest example of this is whenever the alien is after you or even just near you, this really intense music will kick in. It sounds very good, and it sets the mood for the situation you're in. Sometimes though, after the alien leaves, this music will just keep going, and it's really annoying. Like, you'll just be walking around working on your objective, and you've got this really loud synth orchestra blasting your ears the whole time, preventing you from listening to any potential enemies around. I'm not sure how or why this happens. It's probably got something to do with the way that the alien AI is handled, and it just gets messed up sometimes. But yeah, this is my only complaint with the audio. And hey, speaking of the alien, let's talk about it next. So if you're making a game about Alien, then you obviously need a really good alien in it. The way it works in this game is really interesting. The best thing I can compare it to is Mr. X from Resident Evil 2. If you've never played that game before, basically the idea is that it acts as an elite enemy that you cannot kill and are always trying to avoid whilst doing other things. The alien is present almost the second you arrive on Sevastopol, even if it's not immediately obvious. However, outside of seeing it in an early cutscene, most players won't actually encounter it until several missions in. You pretty much have to try to engage it to see it as soon as possible, which I think is really cool. It's not a threat for the entire game though. The alien basically has areas or zones that it can be in, and areas where you will never encounter it, like during specific story sections. When you are in an alien zone, it immediately becomes your top priority to avoid it as much as possible because, as I mentioned earlier, it's impossible to kill it. The best you can do if you get seen by it is to use a noisemaker or a flamethrower to send it back into the air vents for a short period of time. The way you keep track of the alien is through the iconic motion detector. This works on all enemies, but it's primarily designed to be used for the alien so that you know how far away it is from you at all times. Be careful though, using this causes noise and can attract the alien to your location if you have it out for too long. You need to be extremely quiet whenever the alien is near you, as even the slightest noise will set it off and immediately send it to where you are. The thing that makes the alien work so well is how unrestricted and real it feels. It's not some ultra-scripted enemy that only shows up when the developers want it to. It feels like you're constantly being hunted, like it can appear at any moment if you make even the slightest mistake. Sometimes it feels like it's messing with you, like when it walks right up to a locker that you're hiding in. But other times, it's the most violent, aggressive thing that you've ever seen in a game before because of how quickly you can go from just minding your own business to being slaughtered by it. You can even use it to your advantage. The alien isn't just after you, it's after everything that it sees as a threat. So if you've got a noisemaker on hand, chuck it at a group of enemies and enjoy the show. It's also just really cool to look at and watch. The alien was rarely seen in the movie, and the few times it was were super up-close shots and in the dark. Now whether this is because they wanted it that way, or just from technology limitations at the time, I'm not sure. Here though, you get to see it up close and admire it for a while, even if it is killing you. Unfortunately though, it's not all good. The AI is very inconsistent. Now look, coding is hard. I don't know the first thing when it comes to creating AI for a game, but I know it's extremely difficult. It's very impressive what they managed to do here, but it just straight up doesn't work the way it should pretty often. I think the biggest issue with it is that it will just not leave you alone sometimes. There were plenty of instances where I just had to hide in a locker for like 3 to 5 minutes because it would just go back and forth in the room and not leave. Or sometimes it would appear out of its vent and come running at me at the speed of sound when I didn't make any noise whatsoever. It's incredible when it works, but it's very annoying when it doesn't, which is pretty often unfortunately. I've heard that its AI is actually better and more consistent on the Nightmare difficulty, but Nightmare also makes finding crafting items super rare, so I don't think that's a good first-time experience either. As a whole though, it's definitely not something that ruins the experience, not even close. It's just one of those things that reminds you that you're playing a video game. Alien Isolation actually got quite a bit of post-launch content in the form of paid DLC, 2 story ones and some smaller stuff. The first one is called Crew Expendable. This DLC is basically a reimagining of the movie scene where the survivors try to trap the alien. You can choose to play as either Ellen Ripley, Parker, or Dallas. It was really cool getting to see these characters as in-game models, and they're even voiced by the original cast. Your choice in who you play as ultimately doesn't matter, as it plays out the same way with all 3, except you get different voice lines with each character. One other really nice touch is that the motion detector is replaced with the one from the movie instead of the more compact one from the base game. The DLC only features a couple objectives and is very short, coming in at about 30 to 40 minutes. Overall, it's a solid expansion that's filled with fan service and is a nice addition to the base game. The next piece of DLC is called Last Survivor. This DLC aims to recreate the ending of the first movie where Ellen activates the ship's self-destruct function in an attempt to destroy the alien. It's again a really short DLC that's only around 30 minutes or so, but it's a really cool experience getting to play out the final events of the movie. It's very faithful to the film in pretty much every way and is a great send-off for Alien Isolation. The last bit of DLC that it received is called Survivor Mode. This is a collection of challenges that take place in locations from the main campaign. They're all time-based and have a point system that allow you to get high scores on a leaderboard. The leaderboard is pretty much worthless on PC though, because the top spot for each one is just taken by someone that clearly used some kind of cheat or mod to set an impossible time and score. Aside from that, they offer a decent amount of extra lore to the game, but nothing substantial. Also, the alien AI in this mode is cranked up to 11 or something, because it seems to just instantly know where you are no matter what you do. I literally died more in an hour of this mode than I did in the entire campaign. It's an alright DLC. Challenge modes aren't really my thing, so I didn't put too much time into it. If you really liked the gameplay of Alien Isolation, then you'll probably be into this, but if you were satisfied with the base game and the other DLCs, I would say you're fine skipping this. And that's Alien Isolation. I'm glad I finally got around to this one, as it's been in my backlog for a really long time now. It's got its problems, but I think it's a super unique and well executed take on the survival horror genre, and one that I would recommend to anyone that likes these kinds of games. Thanks for watching, and have a good one.